Well, during this week, I think I've heard more comments about here to there. When you're only talking two words, two very common words. But I've heard more about what was said last week than I think anything that I preached. And I'm praying that resonates inside of you, because the here is looking in the mirror. I hope you've been doing that this week. I've been looking in the mirror. There are some things I don't like what I see. For myself personally, there's some things that I don't like for my family, for my church. It's an honest look, because if there's no holy discontent and holy dissatisfaction with here, we'll never move there. In 586 BC, the children of Israel were carried into exile by the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar. I always loved that name as a child. It's one I could never say. You think it's hard in English, you ought to try it in Spanish. I'm not even going to try it. You wouldn't know anyway, right? His kingdom was eventually defeated by the Medes and the Persians under Cyrus the Great. And a few generations later, under Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, and his cupbearer was a Jew named Nehemiah. And here's how the book that bears his name begins. Nehemiah 1 through 4. And the words of Nehemiah, son of, here we go with these fun words, Hakaliah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, when I was in the citadel of Susa, Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men and questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. So here, we'll take a pause. Here is Nehemiah. He is long ways away from Jerusalem. He is serving as cupbearer to the king of Persia, Artaxerxes, and he gets word about the remnant, those who had been left behind, because you see, the Babylonians carried many of the elite away from Palestine. And they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province, so there's been a return that's taken place, are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. And when I heard these things, I sat down and I wept. And for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heavens. I don't think Nehemiah had ever been there. And yet his heart was broken. It was broken. And he mourned and he fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. It was so terrible that he went into mourning. It was like a death had occurred. He went into mourning accompanied by prayer and fasting. It was a situation that brought on sadness and depression. And he was moved in the deepest part of his inner being. Nehemiah was upset because a once proud people who represented the only true God were now broken. The Lord's chosen people were no longer special. They were nothing but a shadow of what they had once been. And as a Jewish man, he was broken. And finally, about 4 months of praying about this matter, he felt led by the Lord to actually do something about it. It was time for action. Nehemiah 2, the second part of verse 4 and 5. The king said to me, "What is it that you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my ancestors are buried, so that I can rebuild it. Nehemiah was granted permission by the king to return to Jerusalem. He had been so downcast during these 4 months, fasting and praying, that finally he had gotten the king's attention. He didn't even ask. The king asked him, what is it that you want me to do for you? And the vision God had given him was to rebuild the walls there. The walls were the first step in something much, much bigger. The repair was part of a larger vision to restore Jerusalem to her greatness. But it started with the wall. After traveling and finally arriving in Jerusalem, he waited for exactly the right moment to share his vision with the officials living there. It was one thing to know God's will, it's another thing to know his timing. How many of you know that? I know a lot of times what God's will is, but his timing is always a mystery to me. He seems to be late, but I can tell you this. He's seldom early, but he's never late. Nehemiah 2:11 and 12 says, and I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. So the timing wasn't right. And yet he carried this vision that God had given him. A little bit later, the moment came when he revealed the vision God had given him. Here's what it says in verses 17 and 18. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. And I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. And they replied, let us start rebuilding. And so they began this good work. What a response when the timing of God is perfect. What a response. You see, in this case, the here was Jerusalem in ruins with burned gates. But even more than that, the people were living in disgrace. It was a tremendous motivation for change. They were ready for a change. Here was no longer acceptable as they began to talk about it. They just had no means until God responded through Nehemiah. The vision of a rebuilt wall was there. The ruins were here. The vision was a thriving city, was rebuilt walls, Jerusalem functioning again in its just like it had in the time of David and Solomon. Here was a disaster. There was a restored Jerusalem. A lot of times we get confused with vision and mission. Well, the vision was to see that wall rebuilt. Can't you just, if we could have just got into Nehemiah's brain there, if we could have just taken a snapshot, we would have seen this incredible, strong, beautiful wall that had been restored. He could see it in his mind. He knew what God was asking him to do. But that wasn't his mission. The mission was accomplished. He had to get architectural plans. He had to recruit workers and leaders. He had to get building supplies and then construct the wall. That was his mission. That was his job. That's what he needed to do. But he had to see the wall first. You see, you don't go down that path. You don't go through all that work. You don't go through all that sacrifice. You don't take the risk unless you see it first. And he saw the wall, and he knew. Unfortunately, not everyone living in Jerusalem at this time agreed with the vision God had given Nehemiah. There's always a segment of any group that are not in agreement with God's vision, and I've learned that over time. Nehemiah 2:19 through 20. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're going to do? No, 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 no. They asked, are you rebelling against the king? Uh-huh. Yeah, you're rebelling against the king. I don't think they knew who Nehemiah was. He was the king's cupbearer. Are you rebelling against this king? And I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding, but as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. Now, there's a lot more backstory, but the main thing is they didn't catch the vision. Right. The others, what was their reply? Let's get started. And they began to build. Nehemiah is a good biblical example of a leader with vision. Not only did the remnant of Jerusalem understand here, so did Nehemiah. It's what drove him to prayer and fasting. Without some type of intervention, there was a good possibility that the nation would die. The wall had to be rebuilt. It had to be rebuilt. He saw his nation, his culture, his heritage going down the tubes. And he says, I can't stand it. It drove him to prayer and fasting. And he was so downcast that the king noticed. The wall had to be built. He got a glimpse of the future. And the Lord allowed him to see there. And as a result, he dedicated himself to this vision. He would move from here to there with the Lord's help and the cooperation of the people living there. And eventually, even the king would get on board. So what is a vision? You see, we hear a lot about that in the church. Vision and mission and objectives and goals. Well, let's make it real easy. A vision's what you see. Duh. You see those vision charts at the optometrist? You got to. Vision is what you see. If he had never seen the wall, he would have still stayed there, and the wall would have never been rebuilt. He had to have a vision. You see, mission is what you do. Once you have a vision, then you know what you need to do. And you do it, and that's your mission. And in this context, I'm not examining this type of vision where the person receiving the vision goes into a trance or dreamlike state and for a moment loses connection with his or her present reality. We're not talking that kind of vision. Many tend to think that this is the only true spiritual vision, sort of like John on the Isle of Patmos, where he saw so many things and he wrote it down. And we have the book of Revelation. Man, that's crazy stuff. That's a vision. That's a nightmare. But I believe the type of vision Nehemiah received to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem was just as spiritual as John's vision. It was just different. It was a longing. It was an idea that was planted in his mind and in his heart after prayer and fasting for 4 long months. How would I define vision? I want you to see this next slide. This is the best definition. It's supernatural foresight with insight based on hindsight. Okay. Well, at least it's 6 words. Well, 7. Supernatural foresight there with insight revealed by the Holy Spirit based upon hindsight. That's vision. True vision is imparted by God to His chosen people to better enable them to know His mind and to do His will. Well, how important is vision? Any of you heard of George Barna? George Barna is famous. He does surveys in the Christian world. He looks to find trends so that he can predict what's going to happen to the church in the future and help us to prepare for that. He's written books for years. And here's what he says. In evaluating churches that are growing and healthy as compared to those that are stagnant or in decline, one of the key distinctions that emerges is the existence of true vision for ministry. That's his observation. Vision. Let me read it again. In evaluating churches that are growing and healthy as compared to those that are stagnant or in decline, one of the key distinctions that emerges is the existence of true vision for ministry. The church at least has an idea of what there looks like and is moving from here to there. Of course, what's the verse that we always quote? Proverbs 29:18. Where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happily is he. Now that's the King James Version. And it elevates the importance of vision because those who don't have it, literally and figuratively, they die, they perish. God's people must be able to see where they're going to accomplish anything for themselves and for the Lord. But there's a difficult passage to translate from Hebrew into English, and some of the more modern versions give a different rendering to this verse, which actually makes it even more powerful. Here's the New International Version. Where there is no revelation, people cast off restraint. But blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. Where there's no revelation, people cast off restraint. But blessed is the one who heeds wisdom's instruction. It's more than just vision. It's God-given vision. We call it revelation. You see, if there is only what's in a man's mind, if it doesn't come from God, then it's man's plans. The vision has to be a revelation. A vision or a revelation pulls together a group of people to help them move forward as one, not many. Vision comes from God. It's not the result of consensus, but it should result in consensus. I wrote this down, and visionless people run around like chickens with their heads cut off. Have any of you ever seen a chicken with its head cut off running around? It's pretty gross, isn't it? It's pretty ugly, pretty chaotic. I've never seen that. Thank goodness I've been spared. But how many of us have used that phrase, you know? I run around like a chicken with its head cut off. I think my mom said that about us boys probably once a week, you know? I have a brother that's 4 years younger than I am. But that's sort of the image here, that if you don't have vision, you're sort of like chickens with their head cut off, just kind of running around. Where there's no revelation, people cast off restraint. You know, I'm not a big fan of the message, but I think this time it helps to give a little more depth and clarity to our understanding of this verse. So I think sometimes there's some value in just kind of seeing what others say. And the message is really someone else's interpretation. It's not a translation, but there's great value. If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what He reveals, they are most blessed. Wow. Boy, that hit all the notes for me. If people can't see what God's doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what he reveals, they're most blessed. Obedience to what God reveals, his vision for our church will bring blessing. It's going to bring God's favor. We talked about that a few weeks ago. God's favor. This is the year of God's favor. I believe that. I believe God gave us that message. And really in this passage, vision is the bridge between the present and the future. The vision is what gets us to there. It is there, but it gets us there as well because it becomes the motivator. Without vision, we perish. Vision gives the pain of the moment, the sacrifices for change. It gives them purpose. You see, we don't want to suffer for no reason at all. We don't want to work hard for no reason at all. Some of us are in love with work, but most of us aren't just that in love with doing things, are we? I mean, just working. Here's a pile of bricks. Move it from there to there. Got it over there? Move the pile from bricks from there to there. Somewhere along the way, we're going to say, why? We need purpose. And vision gives us purpose for our work and for our mission. The absolute goal of vision for ministry is to glorify God and extend his kingdom. If it doesn't do this, then ultimately it has failed. And I'll say if it fails in that way, it's probably because it was a man's vision and not God's. You see, it's not vision, it's revelation. The church had been a flagship church, a leading church in the Pentecostal movement before the Assemblies of God were formed. Prior to the era of the mega church, it averaged a weekly attendance of over 600 people who came to hear a stirring message from the pulpit and experience the ministry of the Holy Spirit. Its sanctuary was second to none, including theater seats, chandeliers, an elevated platform, and a pipe organ. The facilities also featured a huge fellowship hall and kitchen and a 3-story education wing. Only 1 mile from Main Street, the church's location gave it a primary role in all that happened in the center of the city. Prominent businessmen, professionals, and community leaders were members of the church. It was a church of impact and influence. And I can do a lot more description of that church because it was my home church, Central Assembly of God in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Boy, I think I could paint a picture of that church. It's just spent so many hours there. It's like some of you here in this church. Unfortunately, by the time I arrived on the scene, things had started to change. The neighborhood around the church had become depressed. Poor, racially diverse families moved into the area, and the center of the city was no longer glamorous. Businesses and middle-class families moved to the suburbs. Downtown was no longer the place to go. In fact, it was just dangerous. Little by little, the old-timers and the established families of the congregation wanted to attend a church near them, and the attendance dropped off. Some Sundays, there were more empty chairs than there were filled chairs. Finances plummeted, ministries were terminated, and infighting began. What had been known as the church at 5th in Peoria was now called the church at 5th in Korea. But something happened. Something happened to arrest this downward spiral, even if it was just for a few years. A pastor came with vision from God. He saw the lost and the dying in the neighborhoods around the church. And with the help of a small army of spiritual warriors, he turned the beautiful, pristine church into a hospital for broken lives. He didn't care about the color of their skin or how much money was in their wallet or whether they had fine clothes. The mission of the church was to reach the lost. The vision was to do it in its present location with those who were willing to be used of God. And soon the beds of the spiritual hospital were full again. People hungry to experience God. And his transformational touch pressed through the doors and soiled the beautiful theater seats in the sanctuary. And classrooms were packed with kids who drew on the walls. And lessons were being taught by first-time teachers. The halls of the church were loud and a bit chaotic. But God was there, and he was moving. And once again, it was a place to go to receive spiritual health, spiritual food. It started with a vision. It started with a vision. He saw those lives. And all those that were moving away, they couldn't see them. That was the moment when he arrived that God got hold of my life. And I not only caught the vision of what was going on there, I raised my hand. I was 17 years old. And I said, I don't care. I'll get out there. I'll knock on doors. We'll fill this big old yellow bus. In fact, we got 6 of them. Let's fill them all. It doesn't matter. But I also caught a glimpse of a vision for my life through that time. Vision, it drove everything. It changed and transformed that church. It changed and transformed my mother, who had never taught Sunday school in her life, and she was teaching Sunday school because she caught the vision. Amen. If we open our ears and eyes, we'll understand that vision is the first step to beginning the process of changing us. Reminds me of the repeated declaration found in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation when the 7 churches of Asia Minor were addressed. Whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. What is the Spirit saying to our church? What are we hearing? Vision is there. And with God's help, I'll do my very best to describe there when we return from vacation in a couple of weeks. And I know I'm leaving you hanging. But it's much bigger. You can't take just a few moments. Right. I ask your forgiveness for that. But it's taken 2 sermons just to get us to this point. Like a painting, we'll begin to sketch a beautiful picture of the future that I believe that God has given. It will lack some detail. Some of the colors won't be there, but it will be a start. We must not fool ourselves. To move a church from here to there requires more than hype and emotion and a few stirring services. And those are all good. I love the mountaintop, don't you? Woo! You like the mountain? I love it. It takes more than that. You see, that's part of it, but it takes more than that. It requires commitment, dedication, and prayer. It requires faith. There's risk involved. If there was no risk, it wouldn't require faith. It's not going to happen overnight. But I believe we'll see some immediate fruit, and I believe that'll be more of a motivator as we move from here to there. There were 3 bricklayers working beside each other on a wall. And I've seen that in Peru. You know, for someone who's not a builder, I've built a lot of churches. I learned a lot of Spanish vocabulary dealing with construction. And I can see 3 bricklayers right there in a row. 2 of them Peruvian, 1 of them American, working together on the same team. There are 3 bricklayers working beside each other on a wall. And someone came to the first one and said, "What are you doing?" "Well, what's it look like I'm doing?" he replied sarcastically. "I'm laying bricks." The man asked the next guy on the wall what he was doing. He said, "Well, can't you see what I'm doing? I'm building a wall." Finally, the last man was asked what he was doing, and he exclaimed, "I'm building a great cathedral for God." I'm building a great cathedral for God. The first man had no vision. He could only see the moment. I'm laying bricks. The second man had a general impression of what he was doing. He could see tomorrow, but no much further. Well, I'm building a wall. But the third man had vision. He knew the purpose of his job and he embraced it. He saw the future. He'd captured the vision and was willing to do whatever was necessary to see it accomplished. That's vision. As I close this morning, I want to call the church to a time of prayer. Spontaneous prayer groups in homes. You know, the church is open every day. You know, this is the least busy place in the entire city. Right here, this sanctuary. Now, do you honestly think that Becca's going to tackle you at the front door, at the side door here, if you're coming into this sanctuary to pray? Now, we've been growing together, working, and, you know, sometimes she is an attack dog, let me tell you. But I don't think she's going to stop you from coming in here to pray. You know, you can call the parsonage, and I'm going to be gone for a week, but when you can call and say, Pastor, I'd like to just come over. I know it's Thursday night, but I want to just pray in the sanctuary. I feel like I need to do that. Now, you don't think your pastor would get out of his jammies and put on his clothes and come over here and unlock the church so you can pray in the church? You don't have to come here to pray. I'm just giving you an example. You can pray in your home. You can form prayer. You can pray at your job. You can fast your lunch and you can pray. But if we're going to move from here to there, we've got to catch a vision. And the way we do it is exactly what Nehemiah did. What did Nehemiah do? He fasted and prayed. And it just made him sensitive when God finally spoke and gave him a vision. He saw that wall. He saw it. Will you take time? I'm calling you to prayer. Fasting, if you feel led to fast. We haven't talked about fasting so much in the church since I've been here. I mean, it can get really complicated, but sometimes it's just skipping a meal and praying instead of eating. And I'm sure most of our figures could handle that. Now, if you're diabetic or something like that, I understand. Will you pray with me? Will you pray with me? Will you spend a season of time praying? Some of you have been praying for a while. I understand. Some of you are praying during the interim period. I understand that, but I'm asking us to intensify our efforts of prayer. I know the Lord is calling me to more prayer. If nothing else, it's because that silly guy on Wednesday night keeps talking about prayer every Wednesday night, and the conviction has gotten to me, and I got to pray more. The silly guy is me, okay? Some of you, that's all we've been studying on Wednesday night is prayer. And I've just been called to pray more. Moving from here to there. Will you do that? Will you do that? Stand with me, please.
Open the eyes of my heart,
Sing with us.
Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. I want to see you. See you high and lifted up, shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want shining in the light of your glory. Pour out your power and love as we sing, holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want to see you. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. Holy, holy, holy. I want to see you.
We're going to dismiss, and I'm told that you never end with a negative illustration, but I've got to do it this morning. The church that I described to you